Vinasanaya cha dharmasya sarvadharmaswarupine Avatara Varisthaya Ramakrishnaya te namaha. We will continue from where we stopped yesterday, though this is not a verse by verse exposition of the third chapter, but I shall quote a few verses from the third chapter, from different chapters of the Gita. Now, yesterday I made a very relevant point, I think, that is, Gita is not just a religious text in the conventional sense. It is certainly the most important and the most fundamental religious and spiritual scripture of Hindu Vedanta tradition, but it has got another dimension. It can be considered to be a book of manual that will help us to bring spirituality into every activity in our life, into our daily life situations. And also yesterday we discussed this problem that comforts do not necessarily bring happiness. That's an important point we should remember. Comforts are necessary, but physical comforts do not necessarily translate into happiness or contentment as we understand it. Because physical comforts can sometimes produce new problems. It can solve certain problems, but it can also produce some fresh problems. Problems of prosperity, problems which are closely linked to success, prosperity, like workaholism, anxiety, restlessness, depression. Many of these problems are very common in highly industrialized, highly prosperous societies. So it's a very common thing. In fact, Gita itself begins by posing a problem, in fact, a dilemma, a confusion. That's what Arjuna was facing. That's how the whole text begins. Though the background is a battlefield, frequently great men like Gandhi and others have tried to look upon this as a metaphor, as a symbol. In our own life, we sometimes confront problems, dilemmas and confusions. So how to make use of a great spiritual ideal to solve these problems? Now, when you have a set ideal in front of you, one advantage is you are able to mobilize all your intellectual resources, all your energy resources, all your focus in one direction, and that will reduce distraction and dissipation of energy. This is a very important point. Vivekananda makes a strong point. If you have an ideal, a person with an ideal may make 50 mistakes, but a person without an ideal may make 50,000 mistakes. These are not his words, but this was it was in a nutshell what Swamiji meant when he spoke in these along these lines. That is, if you have an ideal, still you may make mistakes, but you may make smaller mistakes or you may make fewer mistakes. So one should have an ideal. The ideal could be the ideal of Swadharma. The ideal could be the ideal of, let us say, Rajarshi Dharma, yesterday I mentioned, combining action and contemplation, or looking upon whatever we do with a sense of sanctity and sacredness, and pay full attention to what we do, and bringing a sense of sanctity into what we do. So when you do anything with a sense of sanctity, what we call Shraddha, then what happens? Mind also becomes calm and quiet, becomes composed, and it feels a kind of inner completeness, less confusion, less worry, because this is my duty and this is my road to success in material life, and this is also my road to my own spiritual fulfillment. So everything you do with this ideal that this is my Swadharma, this is my sacred duty, my sacred obligation, by virtue of my status, my position in society, or my responsibilities or my social demands. This is my duty, my obligation. So I have to do this to the best of my ability and leave it there, no bargaining. Once we evolve such a high ideal, what happens? A lot of possibilities for distractions and worries and anxieties can be reduced or neutralized completely. And one of our great scriptures, it is not from the Vedas, but one of the supplementary texts written by Shankaracharya, gives a very interesting, a very graphic picture of what happens when we lose sight of this higher ideal. It's almost, suppose you have a packet of mustard seed in your hands. It is all organized into a single unit and you have packed it in a packet that you're holding in your hand. But suppose you unpack it and throw it around, it gets scattered all over the place and it is very difficult to bring it back. So mind also can become fragmented when it deviates from the high ideal. Everyone needs some ideal. There's no doubt about it. Because if you have some ideal in front of you to guide you, to inspire you, on the one hand, the immediate psychological advantage is you will have less anxiety and you will have less distraction and you are able to organize your mind, your energies in one direction. And it helps you to do better what you are doing, and also it reduces scope for distractions and confusions and conflicts. There is an interesting verse in Shankaracharya's Viveka Chudamani. It's a well-known verse. It speaks of a person who is throwing a ball from the top of a staircase. Suppose you reach the top of the staircase and you throw a ball down. The ball hits the top stair and it falls down step by step. It doesn't and it will not stop before it reaches the bottom of the staircase. So when mind gets distracted from its guiding ideal, then it gets fragmented. The verse is Lakshachudam chedyadi jittamesham bahirmukham sannipade tatastataha pramadatat pratyuda kelikantukaka sopanapamtu padito yatha tatha. It's something very interesting, It can be a guiding manual for our everyday life. When we get distracted or when we get detached from a higher ideal, mind gets fragmented, mind gets distracted. And Gita also has got a similar verse in the 2nd chapter. How mind becomes unhappy, how mind loses its balance. Dhyayato vishayan pumsaha sangastheshu upajayade Sankar sanjayade kamaha kamar krodho bijayade krodhat bhavati sammoha smriti vibhramaha smriti bhramshat buddhinasu buddhinashat pranasyati. The second chapter says, when we get distracted or detached from our central ideal, whether it is Swadharma or it is the ideal of looking after our whole life as a sacred sacrament, as a yajna, as yesterday we discussed this. When we lose sight of this higher ideal, what happens? The mind begins to get attracted towards various sense objects all around. And then the mind develops a desire to possess those things. And in course of time, what really happens is the mind cannot keep quiet unless it makes an effort to possess those things. And it doesn't always succeed. Any person who gets attracted to various sense objects around and tries to procure them for his own enjoyment is bound to fail somewhere. Failure is inevitable if we always look for success all the time. That's because continuous success as an unbroken chain is impossible for anyone. So what happens is, whenever we do not succeed or we do not succeed as much as we want, we interpret as a failure, and that creates disappointment. And when disappointment comes, we become bitter, and slowly our mind may lose its balance. This is how Lord Krishna analyzes how we become unhappy. It's a very well-known interpretation of the Gita. How and why we become unhappy. How and why we lose our touch with the reality of our ideal. And Gita tells us that there are certain problems that frequently we face. In fact, this discussion begins as a response to a question from Arjuna. Arjuna asked one question. It's a very interesting question. Atha kena prayuktoyam papam charadi purushaka anichan abhivashneya beladiva niyojitaka. What it means is, impelled by what? Does a person do things which are bad, which are not good for him and not good for others? Because frequently, as I mentioned, we get distracted towards various objects. Now, what is that invisible power that impels our mind, that drives our mind towards actions which we may not normally want to do or like to do? So what is the reason for it? And frequently we do things that we know very well may not be good for us. So we do things against our own wishes, our own interests. So there is a helplessness. Frequently we face this dilemma in our everyday life. We are forced to do things as if we are forced to do things which we know very well are not good for us. So what is the explanation for this? See, Lord Krishna, he gives an elaborate explanation. But at the beginning he says, Kama yesha krodha yesha rajoguna samudbhavaha mahasana mahapatma vidyena mihavairinam. So Lord Krishna names two important reasons for this mysterious phenomenon. I mean, we feel impelled, or we feel driven, or we feel compelled to do things which we know are not good for us. That kama yesha krodha yesha. One is desire, we can call it greed, a desire to possess things, and also anger. These are interrelated. Desire is good. Desire for doing something noble, desire for doing something wonderful, a high ideal, and then strong determination to work out that ideal, to reach the goal. All these are very good things. But the same desire can frequently take a negative form, a dangerous form. It can take the form of greed, a strong desire for possessing things which we don't need, really speaking. Driven by greed. So a billionaire wants to make more money, he wants to add a few more millions to his accumulated wealth. This frequently we find in society. So we don't often desire what we need. Frequently desire acts independently of our needs, requirements and situations. Then desire can become itself an enemy, our own enemy, the enemy of a friend, and that becomes poison for our mind. So desire is one important cause. That's what Lord Krishna says. Another important cause is krodha. The kama means desire. Desire in its most negative aspects. We are not talking about desire to do something noble, desire to meditate, desire to practice some higher ideals. That's not what we are talking about. What we are talking about, desire, which takes the form of extreme obsession for sensual enjoyments. That kind of desire is the mother of all problems. That is what Buddha also said. Desire is the fundamental cause of grief, dukkha. Essentially, of course, there is a long chain from desire to dukkha, but essentially, there cannot be any kind of dukkha or grief or a feeling of incompleteness without desire. So desire becomes our enemy. As I mentioned, desire can take the form of greed. It can take the form of a strong obsession, a strong sense of possession, possessiveness and so on. And whatever we desire, we do not always succeed in obtaining. We may have thousands of desires. We may be ready to work hard, but it is not possible for everyone to achieve what he desires. It is impossible. There will be some failure somewhere. So, these are two fundamental reasons why people sometimes become unhappy. So, of course, this is called the 6 important enemies of mind or enemies of happiness, so to speak. You find sensual desire, anger, greed, delusion, pride and arrogance put together, and jealousy. That Shadurmi is called. 6 enemies. Now, how to get out of this? It is the natural character of the mind. Can't help it. See, we won't be able to program our mind. We may be able to exert some freedom when it comes to physical activity. We should turn in this direction or that direction. There is some freedom. We can decide for ourselves. But we have no freedom to decide or to predict what thought is going to emerge in our mind next moment. So mind is totally unpredictable. But mind can be modified by generating new ideas, new spiritual possibilities, spiritual samskaras can be generated by good actions. Another important thing is, even the least bit of action will produce some result. As I mentioned yesterday, there is a very, very interesting story in one of our spiritual devotional classics. It comes in the Bhagavata Purana. Technically, it is called the story of Ajamila Vakyanam, it is called. The story goes like this, but it's got a very profound message. How even a little bit of an attempt to practice a higher ideal becomes a spiritual bank balance that we can later be benefited by. So once upon a time there was a man, and his name was Ajamila. He was brought up by his parents as a good, law-abiding boy who was very devoted to his parents, and he was very dutiful, fully conscious of his duties and obligations, and he was an ideal son, an ideal person. But what happened later on? He had a deviation. He had a fall from his ideals, and then what happened? His life became indisciplined. He became a profligate. He became a source of problems. He became a curse to society and to his own family and his own parents. So he led a very, very indisciplined bohemian life. And it so happened that it was time for him to die. Now, in Hindu tradition, there is a belief that whatever thoughts come to your mind at the time of death will decide your future life. That's a belief. Whatever thought currents, whatever samskaras and memories get crowded into your mind when you're breathing your last will decide your future lives, your destiny after death. Whether you go to heaven or hell, whether you have blessings from God, or whether you will be sent to hell, and all these are all the ancient belief systems, which is part of Hindu mythology. So this man was very old then, and he was about to die, and he was miserable, he was worried, he was anxious because he became aware of what all misdeeds he had done at the later part of his life when he fell away from his higher ideal. And then but suddenly he recalled his son's name. The son's name was Narayana. Narayana in Sanskrit is a synonym of Lord Vishnu. It is a synonym of God, so to speak. Every religious tradition has got many names by which they pray to God. So Narayana is one of the well-known names in the Vaishnava tradition. So he did not think of God, because you cannot think of God when you are about to die unless you are prepared for it. If you have led a very pious life, meditative life, a disciplined life, practicing dharma, practicing spiritual disciplines, then perhaps you may be able to think of God when the last moment comes. But otherwise, the totality of the essence of all your activities and your thought currents you have done in your life will crowd together in the mental system, and that will be the thought currents in your mind when you are leaving this body. This is the general belief. So this man, Ajamila, had led a very wayward life, very bohemian life, very indisciplined life. So there was no way that he was going to think of God at the time of death. But it so happened that he had named his eldest son as Narayana, which is a synonym of Lord Vishnu. So the last moment, when he became totally helpless, he called aloud. He was calling his son to come to his bedside, Narayana. But suddenly he remembered he was chanting and reciting the same holy name of God when he was a small boy, when he was going to temples, when he was practicing religious rituals, when he was being brought up by his parents as an ideal son, because his deviation happened much later. So when he was a young person, young boy, he was brought up properly as a very religious person, as a very devoted person. So he used to recite this holy name of Narayana as a little boy, which also happened to be the son's name, whom he recalled to his bedside when he was about to breathe his last. So when his son came, he suddenly remembered, oh, this is the same name I was uttering and I was reciting with great devotion once upon a time. So his mind went back to those days. So what happened? All the previous samskaras, the good holy samskaras, the good holy impressions that he had accumulated in his mental system by spiritual practices in the younger days, came back to his mind. They crowded back into his mind. And immediately his mind went to God. So at that time it is said that the Lord Vishnu's messengers came and took him to heaven. Then there's a story, there's the other part of the story. But the central message which is relevant for the present context is, if a person tries to practice Karma Yoga with a sense of sanctity and devotion and sense of sacredness, what happens is his mind transforms even everyday activity into a spiritual practice. So every activity can be turned into a spiritual practice. That's why this Karma Yoga ideal has a transformative effect on the mental system. If that is the spiritual uniqueness of this Karma Yoga ideal. It transforms every activity into a spiritual practice, into a spiritual discipline. So that's why there is a verse in one of the well-known devotional hymns of Shankaracharya, who wrote 65 devotional hymns addressed to different deities. So in one of the hymns he says, an ideal person who does his or her everyday activities, duties and obligations as an offering to God, his every activity becomes a religious practice and his every word becomes a prayer. His every thought becomes a meditation, and his whole movement becomes the sacred act of the sacrament of going around the temple, and his whole life becomes a pilgrimage. That is the great statement in one of the most moving poems of Shankaracharya. So what happened? This is the advantage of practicing Karma Yoga with the ideal of devotion. See, it's much more easy to practice Karma Yoga for those who believe in God, or those who traditionally pray to one God idea or not. But the uniqueness of Karma Yoga is it has got a not together secular aspect to it. Even that is, Karma Yoga is the only spiritual practice that could be practiced, that could be done in a secular context, by making the secular activity into spiritual activity. So whatever service we are doing, even our workplace, factories, universities, or hospitals, everything can become a Karma Yoga, can generate spiritual energy. A person who goes on doing his duty with a higher ideal will eventually become calm and quiet and composed and becomes spiritually enlightened. And this produces a unique effect on the mental system, which is called Chitta Prasada. Chitta Prasada means when your mind is in good terms with yourself, when our mind becomes our best friend, when our mind becomes our guide, our philosopher, our protector. So that's what happens as a person. And then you feel a kind of inner contentment. Now, people may ask this question, but desires are inevitable. In our everyday activity, we cannot do things without desire. We cannot do things without a definite motive, definite purpose. That is natural, that is true. But then even desire can be given a spiritual uplift. Even anxiety and worry can be given a spiritual orientation. The natural impulses which create problems and dilemmas and conflicts in our everyday life can be given a spiritual direction, and then it becomes a spiritual discipline. It is called in Patanjali Yoga Sutra, it is called Parinama Dukkha. If you can worry about something higher in life, if we can get concerned about something higher, if we can get anxious about something noble, then the problem of anxiety, the problem of worry will eventually disappear. Worry becomes a problem only when we worry about things that agitate our mind, that will make us miserable. Well, again, in this context, Buddha's life is an example. You look at Buddha's life. I refer to Buddha as a supreme example of karma yogi because he was an agnostic. He did not believe or disbelieve in God. At least he doesn't openly admit that there is a God or that there is no God. He was not an atheist, but he was not a believer. He was an agnostic, so to speak. But he is also considered to be one of the greatest spiritual personalities the world has produced. And it's so relevant today, in today's context, because we need a spiritual ideal that goes beyond the traditional interpretations of religion. When you talk about religion in its conventional sense, in the way it is understood, unfortunately, in many circles, it is frequently divisive. It has a tendency to polarize people, and it has a tendency to make people fanatical and one-sided. But when you talk about spirituality as a universal ideal, it is harmonizing, it is unifying, and it is universal. So Karma Yoga ideal has this unique possibility of becoming a universal ideal that is acceptable and practical for all people in every conceivable situations in life. So that's why Buddha is becoming so relevant in our times. So Buddha had a lot of worry and a lot of dilemmas, a lot of confusions, a lot of conflicts. But those conflicts were not linked to his own comforts or discomforts. When Buddha was born as a prince, he was 28 years old, and he was brought up in an atmosphere of luxury. He did not know anything about the darker side of human life, poverty, misery, grief. He never knew any of those things. He didn't bother. He did not have to worry about anything in his life. His life was always happy in the ordinary worldly sense. So one day when he was 28 years old, he was being taken out in a chariot along the streets of the capital city. And as he was moving from place to place, he saw the dark, he had a direct confrontation with the darker side, darker aspects of human life. Old age, death, sickness, all these problems, which are so universal, which everyone will have to face. So he saw an old man looking miserable. He was so old, so weak, so miserable. Then he saw a sick person, a sick man. He was suffering from some illness. He also looked very miserable, full of grief. Then he saw a dead body being taken to the cremation ground nearby in a procession. The people, the, the relatives of the dead person were crying and weeping. So these are the three images, three visions that shook his mind. That was how he was introduced to the darker side of human life. Before that, he never knew there was such a thing as illness, sickness, old age or death. He never knew such things existed. That's the funny part of Buddha's early part of life. And he came back to his palace and he thought over the mystery of old age and sickness and death. And then, and this is more important, he also saw a sage, a saint, a saintly looking person sitting somewhere along in the streets. He was a monk, he was a saint, he was always happy. He looked so happy, he looked like the embodiment of happiness, true happiness. So that made him think, and he thought for a long time. Eventually he went back to the palace and he thought for a moment and he wanted to find a solution to this problem of grief and confusions and the darker aspects of human life like death and sickness. And he left his home, his palace, and that is how Buddha started his journey. Now this ability to become worried about something universal, a problem that affects the whole humanity, the whole mankind, that worry doesn't make us miserable. Though it makes us worried about things, but it doesn't make us miserable. People don't go and cry and weep and shed tears because there is an earthquake in a distant country. They may be worried, but they will not shed tears. It doesn't make them miserable, it doesn't make them wretched, but it makes them sad. And this kind of sadness will prompt some good activity, charity, nobility, broad-mindedness, philanthropy, and so on. So that ability to promote, to sublimate our normal conflicts and worries and concerns, it is called Parinama Dukkha in the language of yoga tradition. So Parinama Tapa Samskara Dukkhehi Guna Visheshacha Dukkhameva Sarvam Vivekinaha. In the commentary, great interpreters of Patanjali Yoga Sutras like Vyasa emphasize the point. The ability to worry about a problem that affects other people is Parinama Dukkha, and that is possible only for highly evolved persons. So that is the important message that you find in Buddha's life. That is the ability to become worried and concerned about problems that affect others. So this is one way of giving an uplift, giving a promotion, giving a sublimation to our normal conflicts and worries. And this sublimation makes us really happy. It may appear to be very paradoxical, very contradictory, but it's a real fact. When we become concerned and worried about something universal, something sublime, that worry itself hides in it an element of intense pleasure and joy. Those of you who have read the lives of the great mystics, of any great spiritual seekers anywhere in the world, you find they had to go through a lot of hardships and in some cases persecutions, as it happened in the case of many Christian mystics. When they were practicing austerity or meditation, they were persecuted and they were accused of occultism and so on, witchcraft and so on. You can find in these lives of many great spiritual teachers like St. Joseph, and even in the autobiographical writings of St. Teresa of Avila, or you find in the writings of the great Russian mystics, you find this. They went through a lot of hardships, a lot of conflicts, a lot of dilemmas, a lot of inner worries. But still they could withstand all these worries, because worrying about a higher ideal, a spiritual ideal, is a blissful experience. So worry can be converted into something sublime, then it is possible to withstand it. So that is an example of giving a spiritual direction, a spiritual orientation to our normal conflicts and worries. It's called Parinama Dukkha in the yoga tradition. So when we face incessant problems and dilemmas and all that, take up some higher ideal and divert our time, our energy, our resources as far as it is possible towards finding a solution to higher problems. That's why if those who do not have any those who are facing a lot of problems and dilemmas and conflicts can engage in some activity for the good of others, as I mentioned yesterday, for the benefit of others. So every such noble activity will generate a little bit of spiritual wealth, spiritual power, they believe the spiritual bliss. The reason why many of the great mystics could withstand all the persecution they had to undergo was because they were enjoying suffering. Suffering itself becomes an enjoyment when you suffer for God or when you suffer for higher purpose. So Buddha was practicing austerity. For years he sat under a tree. He practiced tremendous austerity with a high resolve. Ihasane shushyuda me sharidam tugasti mamsam cha vilayam cha yantuhu aprapya siddhim bhujanma durlabham naivasanat kayam ataschalishyati. I don't mean to say that what Buddha did is practical for everyone, not at all. But a higher ideal can give us some lesson. Buddha took a resolve, let my body perish, let my body be reduced to bones and marrow. Still, I won't get up from the seat unless I get supreme nirvana, enlightenment. That was Buddha's resolve. So you can find this frequently in our own times. Great captains of industry, men who have succeeded in all areas of material life, business, industry, commerce, and so on, later on start spending their resources for helping people suffering from various diseases in the third world countries, or when people suffer from various natural calamities. They start trust and foundations, and they start diverting their resources, their time and their energy and their interests and their concerns for helping others. It's a natural impulse of a noble person. And there is a reason why they feel that way. Because by making an effort to help others, they derive a great joy. They feel a kind of inner blissfulness. They are able to sleep a little better. You can find, unfortunately, in today's world, the opposite examples. People who have piled up a lot of money, physically, psychologically reduced to miserable states, cannot get 4 hours sleep every day, and when the slightest physical illness comes, it becomes a disaster for them because they cannot withstand it. Because they identify themselves with the physical body. They identify everything that makes the body comfortable as the supreme thing to be cared for. They do not have a higher transcendental outlook. On the other hand, there are noble-minded people. And among them, as I mentioned just now, great industrialists, great scientists, great men of philanthropy. They take up enormous projects to help people. They have never seen them, and they are living in far off continents. Still, they feel a great psychological need to do something good and noble for helping total strangers. The reason is, by doing that, they derive a great inner joy. They get they feel a kind of, they are able to sleep better. So it is not only psychological impulse, it is a psychological need. So Karma Yoga really is one way of letting off the steam that gets accumulated in our system. We do a lot of our everyday activities or duties with lot of drive and push and enthusiasm and dynamism. Okay. Along with that, we also do a little bit of work. Either you may go to a maybe some philanthropical activities, or maybe some education institutions, maybe some church, synagogues or temples, and be part of some noble activity. But doing that, we are putting little money in our spiritual bank. And that is important. That is necessary for us to be able to sleep better every day, every night. Because other activities driven by profit and practical benefit, based on these ruthless utilitarian values, those activities do not generate spiritual wealth, because we want certain benefits. Every activity gets inseparably linked to a practical benefit, some profit or something. That activity does not generate spiritual wealth. It does not generate spiritual energy. But the same activity done as Karma Yoga, it becomes something different, something totally different. It begins to generate spiritual wealth. And how do we know that it generates spiritual wealth? It makes us feel comfortable with our own mind. It has a healing effect on the mental system. We derive a special mysterious joy by doing something that we know very well will not bring us any special benefit, but still will be helpful and beneficial to people in general. So that is a psychological aspect of Karma Yoga. So Karma Yoga has got a transforming effect in our system, in our mental system. And it also produces a particular mindset. It is in Gita, it's called Adhyatma Cheta. It means our whole life gets spiritually enriched by a higher attitude. In Vedanta, Vedanta philosophy looks at reality from three different angles. There is a much more elaborate interpretation which is not relevant to our context, but this is very important. According to Vedanta, there are three levels of realities. The absolute reality, which is eternal, which is Brahman, which is Atman, which is a self, a soul, whatever you may call it. And the relative reality called Vyavaharika Satta, the empirical reality that is relative. It is not absolutely unreal, but it is not absolutely real. It is not absolutely unreal because we live in it. This world is an example of the Vyavaharika Satta. But it is subject to changes, so it is not absolutely real. Then there is something which is only purely conceptual. Our imaginations, what is going on in our mind, we try to sometimes superimpose upon what we see, what we have in our mind. That's not important. But the important point is, the first and second are very important. That is, there is something like an absolute reality, which is Atman. And everything else is empirical or relative. Now, it is not just a philosophical fact, it is something which every child who is going to kindergarten knows, that this world is always changing. And what is changing cannot be called absolutely real, because it is not what is tomorrow. It won't be what it is today. It is subject to changes. Now the point is, once we remember that there is such an absolute, eternal, unchanging reality, and there is something which is changing and relative, then we must uphold the absolute, unchanging reality. It's called Paramarthika Satta. So this gives us to look at world and life from two perspectives. Is this absolutely real, or is it just a changing relative reality? In the Buddhism is also based upon this principle called, one is called Paramarthika Satta, Paramartha Satta, the other is called Samvriddhi Satta. Means Vyavaharika Satta is called by Nagarjuna as Samvriddhi Satta. That means something is empirical, relative. Frequently what happens is, we forget that most of what we experience in our everyday life situations is only relative. So, but when an unhappy situation comes, we forget that this unhappy situation would not be there tomorrow. And so there is no need to worry too much about an unhappy situation. Similarly, when a happy situation emerges, there is no need to be unnecessarily overexcited, because this happy situation will not be there tomorrow. So everything in this world is subject to changes by its very nature. This frequently we forget. So sometimes what happens, when an unhappy situation emerges, frequently though we may know intellectually, but still that intellectual knowledge is not brought into our emotional understanding, it's not brought to the level of sensitivity. So what happens? We get obsessed with the unhappy situation and we become too unhappy. So even from the higher philosophical point of view, it is possible to confront the problem of unhappiness by remembering that every situation at the empirical level is changing and is bound to change. So one should be able to look at both happiness and unhappiness from a higher perspective, and that will help us to look at both with an equanimity of mind. And that's the only permanent way to be always happy. How to be happy all the time? The only way to be happy all the time is to look upon happiness and unhappiness with the same equanimity of mind. So that unhappiness doesn't necessarily make us unhappy. We just say, oh, unhappiness, well, that will be different tomorrow. So immediately we are able to remain tranquil, in a state of perfect mental equanimity when we confront an unhappy situation. That's the only way to be always happy. We will continue the discussion this evening, the last session at 7 o'clock. Now we will have interactions. You are most welcome with your questions.
Okay, Maharaj, there are a few questions already that have come in on YouTube.
Yeah.
If anybody here wants to ask a question, please press the raise your hand button and I will let you ask the question. So the first question on YouTube from Tara. This question is regarding Parinama Dukkha.
Yeah.
How can we be careful to not allow that worry for larger things to agitate our minds?
Yeah.
Sometimes even the larger issues of the world play on the mind, and I wonder about this balance.
Well, I shall give an example. Suppose a person loses his job, or there is a problem of job insecurity. That person may become worried too much, may feel miserable, may feel unsafe. And if, or maybe if anyone's relative, near and dear relative dies, it can make you very unhappy, you may shed tears. But you don't shed tears because there is a natural calamity, an earthquake in some distant continent. You may feel, you may read the newspaper, you may see the videos of people suffering, and you may also become very unhappy in that way. But you don't go and shed tears. And what happens, what will you do when you are a noble person? You may, there's some kind of fundraising going on in the neighborhood to help the victims of natural calamities or Ebola victims in sub-Saharan states or countries. What you do, if you are well enough, you are wealthy enough, you may make a donation. And you feel a great inner contentment. You have done what you could do. If you meet somebody, maybe some asylum, maybe some refugees coming from those places, you may perhaps volunteer to help them in whatever way possible. This is all what you do. But that event doesn't make you so personally feel wretched and miserable as it could as could happen if it is a personal loss. So that's the main difference. So what happens? So normally it doesn't happen. Parinama dukkha doesn't bring any kind of personal misery. And I already gave this example. If you, if one great example of in Western context, what I can recommend is the autobiographical writings of Saint Teresa of Avila. If you read about her, this the interior castle and all, and her own autobiographical writings, she had to face a lot of problems. She was trying to reform the convent system and so on. Now she had to face a lot of problems, but she also derived a great joy in her feeling that she was always praying to Jesus. She took it upon herself as a sacred duty and things like that. So that conviction that this is a noble venture, something very noble to do, that's a healing effect on the mental system. So you don't feel miserable, you don't feel so wretched. On the other hand, if it's a personal loss, frequently it binds you. It can make you miserable. You may shed tears. So this is a great difference. So parinama dukkha doesn't make you feel miserable or give you feeling of wretchedness. Now, personal losses can be turned into parinama dukkha. That's what I was trying to explain. I will do it in the coming session. Because those who are committed to some higher causes in life, like helping people in distant countries and continents, for the good, those who are working for the good of others. There are many people who volunteer in international trust and foundations, who do volunteer work in many parts of the world. Now, when they are able to face their personal problems much more easily, because they are so devoted and so committed to solving problems which are more universal, that helps them to confront their own personal problems in a much more easy manner. Of course, if you believe in prayer and meditation, you find there is a sloga in the Gita, Yogakshemam Vahamikam. If you work for the good of others, or if you worry about others, then God will worry about you. So you will not have to worry about yourself. Your problems will be fixed by God If you try to worry about other people's problems, if you try to fix other people's problems, people who are total strangers to you, out of your compassion, then what happens, you will not have to worry about your own problems. That responsibility will be God's responsibility to worry about your problems. That will be solved automatically. There's a great statement in the Gita.
Okay, Maharaj. There are a few more questions. Zona asks, how do we approach decisions that will not only affect ourselves but other people without fear and doubt?
Yeah, when we are sure about the fact that it brings only good for others, universe is good for others, then there is no need to worry or to fear. Of course, fear can be confronted by focusing on the beneficial aspect of what you are doing. That's one way of confronting fear. I'm not talking about the pathological fear. That is a different thing which should be addressed at a different level. Normal fear expresses itself as concerns. So when it becomes totally irrational, then it requires another approach. Under normal circumstances, our concerns and worries and fears can be addressed by constantly reminding ourselves of the benefit it will bring to everyone around.
So there is one more question from Akshay. A person who is interested to live the life of a monastic, Swamiji, but his parents are dependent on him, then what should he decide? Should he decide to renounce and take a monastic life or work?
Yeah, if the person can somehow contact me, getting my email, and if he is ready to give you personally, not now, personally, if he is ready to give you his telephone number, you can convey my email address, you can write to me. But I shall give you a general answer, which is not specific, but general answer. Generally speaking, if a person wants to be a monk, and if his parents are dependent upon him financially, and also he is the only son, and they are dependent upon him financially, then he should look after their needs and then think of becoming a monk. But if he is independent, if they are also independent, and if he is not the only son, only child, then he need not worry. But this question can be addressed only at a personal level. All that I can say is a general answer, and the general answer is, if the parents are dependent upon him for their financial security for life, then it is not proper for him to desert, to leave, to abandon their parents and to become a monk. He can of course address their needs, and then he can think of becoming a monk. But this discussion should be done at a more personal level. So he is welcome to write to our center. Our email address can be found in the website.
Yes, website is the best way, sfvedanta.org.
Yeah.
So just the next question from the same person. Is asking for more about the key essential things that a karma yogi should follow.
Yeah.
To summarize, what are the key essential things that a karma yogi should follow?
Yeah. The first important thing, he should be able to, he should be very alert to see that karma yoga ideal doesn't make him lethargic or negligent. Because, as I mentioned yesterday, suppose you start practicing this karma yoga ideal, karmanneva adhikaraste, see karma, you perform your duty without any selfish motive. If you suddenly start practicing this, there is a great risk in that. So that should be very important. it's important to remember, your mind may go blank. Suppose you are an employee who is expected to follow a deadline. If you are a student who is preparing for a thesis, if you are a doctor who has his own schedule, everything, he is used to following a strict schedule of work. Suddenly, if you, in the name of Karma Yoga, without understanding the real meaning of Karma Yoga, if you start practicing non-attachment, what could happen is that your mind may go blank. So that should not happen. So it should be done slowly. So first, we must develop the habit of doing our work diligently, efficiently, with sincerity, with all focus, and that should become a natural habit. And then, along with this efficiency, diligence, and Shraddha, we must bring in this element of non-attachment. So, it is not that we work and without any purpose, not at all. It is not, Karma Yoga is not purposeless work, not at all. It is not you're working in the dark with a mind that is blank, not at all. You should not allow your mind to go into void, not at all. So one should first of all practice Shraddha, concentration, application to a duty, diligence, all these qualities. Remember, a Karma Yogi cannot and should not give up these qualities. These are important, these are natural for every Karma Yogi. Every great Karma Yogi will have these virtues, these qualities as his natural character. So, one should be very careful about reading somewhere and then, I need to worry about result. So let me do whatever I want. No, that's not Karma Yoga. Remember, that's the opposite of Karma Yoga. So one should remember, one should be alert to keep intact these higher disciplines like efficiency, diligence and all that. And then slowly, I can be successful, I can be very efficient, but still I should remember, even the most successful person is the most efficient person will have something wanting in him, because that kind of success is necessary, but that's not enough. Along with that, we should also have a transcendental outlook. Yoga means, linking karma yoga means linking karma to a higher ideal. That higher ideal, linking that higher ideal means remaining non-obsessed. You should be free from obsessive attachment to the result. That's the meaning of non-attachment.
Mark asks another question, continuing upon this.
Yeah.
What is the best way to befriend the mind?
Yeah, I addressed this question yesterday, I shall repeat again. When our mind is not friendly with us, how do we recognize this problem? When we want to do something good for ourselves, which you all know very well, mind doesn't cooperate. And the mind's non-cooperation, hostility, can express in the form of procrastination, false justifications. Suppose you say, tomorrow morning onwards I shall meditate. When the time comes tomorrow, tomorrow I have a lot of engagement today, then next day I will do. So this kind of procrastination, postponement, false excuses for not doing. There are many such obstacles that frequently we confront. All can be boiled down to one simple problem. Mind is not willing to cooperate with you when you want to do something that is good for you. Such a mind is not a friend, it's our enemy. But how to turn him around and make him our friend? This non-cooperation, this hostility on the part of mind is nothing but an expression of negative samskaras. Samskaras means tendencies, impressions, memories, on. These negative samskaras, negative tendencies accumulated in the mental system, not only in this life, previous life cycles also. They create this mental block. They create this tendency to non-cooperate. But mind also has got some positive samskaras. That's why the idea, well, I should meditate, I should practice karma yoga. This idea comes to you in the first place, or you feel attracted towards this idea in the first place because you have got some good samskaras in the mind. So these good samskaras should be strengthened, reinforced, and proportionately the negative samskaras will become become weak, they will be weakened. When positive samskaras, which are helpful, which make the mind cooperate with you, become more and more, negative samskaras become weakened. And how do we increase positive samskaras? By giving more food, good food to the mind. Reading, trying again and again practice, discussing with people, associating with people who are practicing karma yoga, or reading books written by people who have practiced karma yoga, avoiding associations which may create conflicts in your mind whether karma yoga is possible or not, and concentrating on associations which can reinforce your own conviction. So these are different ways of increasing positive samskaras. When positive samskaras are generated more and more, mind will slowly become helpful and cooperative. Then mind becomes your friend. Then the mind begins to smile at you. Then when you feel great enthusiasm to do good things, when you feel great enthusiasm to listen to good ideas, it means your mind is slowly becoming a friend. But suppose your mind turns in the opposite direction, it revolts when you try to listen to a good lecture, when you try to read a good book, the mind turns you in the opposite direction, reading something absolutely undesirable. That's an example of mind turning your enemy. So, more and more association with people and ideas, and thereby feeding the mind with good samskaras will slowly make your mind your best friend. And when your mind becomes your friend, what it means is willing to cooperate with you with all enthusiasm. It doesn't bring any mental blocks.
So there is this last question so far. This is from Sunil Kapadia. How can one catch themselves being desirous or attached to sense objects? Oftentimes, these desires starts quite subtly and very small and gradually increase and can be harmful to us.
Yeah. So to develop some good desire, noble desire. So when we really talk about restraining desire, we are talking about restraining desires which are somewhat undesirable. So there are desirable desires. There are healthy desires. So to develop a lot of healthy, good, noble, sublime desires is the first step towards restraining desires. So when your mind is naturally full of good, healthy, noble intentions, then it will create an aversion towards unhealthy or undesirable intentions or ideas. So the first step towards restraining the mind is, the natural first step is to develop some higher, noble, sublime intentions and desires and programs, and then follow that. You are just entering the road. You just entered the road. So you can enter the road, the path leading, the trail leading to the highest spiritual enlightenment by first developing a higher ideal or a higher desire, something noble, something sublime. Because even a noble intention generates spiritual energy. It also generates healthy samskaras. Even a noble activity will make it stronger, but even a noble idea, even a noble desire to do something good itself will produce something noble and sublime in our mental system. That's the first step.
There is one other question here, Maharaj. I want to know what are the parameters for one to feel or say, I have enough. I feel contented in secular life, and karma yoga. That's one.
Remember, this feeling of inner contentment cannot come at the worldly level. So there is an ancient verse in the Mahabharata, you cannot put out fire by pouring more and more ghee into it. If you want to put out fire, you should put into fire something that doesn't burn, that doesn't increase the flame. You have to pour cold water, then only fire can be put out. You cannot pour oil or butter or ghee, anything that burns, then the fire will increase. So, every worldly desire is like oil that you pour into fire, burning fire. So you need to put something else into burning fire, something that doesn't cooperate with fire. That is the enemy of fire. So that is some higher transcendental ideal. Karma yoga, on the one hand, it helps you to do your duty properly, and it also helps you to look beyond your duty. If you are obsessed with your duty, there is no end to duty, there is no end to dissatisfaction, there is no way you can become contented. Because duty, work, desire, all this go, it's like rotating wheel. It never stops anywhere. Wheel doesn't begin anywhere and it doesn't end anywhere. It goes on rotating. It has no end. A straight line has an end. It begins somewhere, it ends somewhere. But a wheel, a circle doesn't end anywhere. So we need to develop a higher ideal, a transcendental ideal. Yoga is a higher ideal. What is yoga? Yoga, psychologically speaking, it is a conviction where I should do my best to do my job properly, to fulfill my obligations. But at the same time, that is not enough. I should look for something beyond, because this work, these obligations may make me successful in the worldly sense. But that worldly success itself is transient. It is not eternal. It will not give me permanent contentment. So for that I need a higher spiritual ideal. So of course Gita gives a very transcendental Atmannev Atmana Tushta Sthita Prajna Stadocchide, means a Sthita Prajna, a person whose mind is always stable, is Atmannev Atmana Tushta. He is very happy, he is very contented, he is always in a state of blissfulness because he identifies himself with Atman. So he doesn't want anything more. When you reach a point where you cannot even think of wanting anything more, you cannot think of adding anything more to yourself, that state of contentment. And that could happen only when you turn your mind to a spiritual ideal. And the spiritual ideal is transcendental, it is transempirical, it is not an empirical ideal, it is a higher ideal, a higher spiritual ideal. Maybe scriptural study, practice of karma yoga, doing good for others, realizing God. There are so many ways of developing a higher ideal. Along with that, our normal duties and obligations should continue. That is the essence of karma yoga. So we will continue this discussion in the last session this evening, 7 p.m. Okay, thank you.
There are only
Pranam
two.
Maharaj, very good session. Pranam.
Yeah, namaskar, all of you, namaskar. Thank you for the questions also.
Do you have time for one more question, Maharaj?
Yeah, okay.
This last one. I think there is one last question from Vidun.
Yeah.
How to know if we are making progress in the practice of karma yoga? How can we measure our progress?
Yeah, again you feel a kind of inner contentment. You get a feeling that there is nothing more I should seek, I should go after. Do your duty, be diligent, go ahead with your work with all enthusiasm. But if you do not always succeed, frequently what happens to everyone, you don't worry. Because you sometimes succeed, sometimes you may not if you succeed as much as you want to succeed. So in that case, a minor failure doesn't create a sense of chaos or disaster to you. You take in your stride. You remain in a state of contentment. But it doesn't mean insensitivity or negligence. That's a very important point. I want to stress this again and again. Karma yoga includes all the virtues of a successful practitioner of karma. Karma means action. But it also includes an element of contemplation. That's all. So a karma yogi naturally will be successful. Yesterday I gave this example. If you just look at the volume of work, some of the great epoch makers who we still remember did for the benefit of humanity without doing anything for their own good. We still remember them. They were the ones who made human civilization so sublime, so great. So all the great epoch makers, they did so much. They were the archetypal CEOs, the greatest CEOs of the world were the great spiritual seekers, the great prophets of the world, like Buddha, Shankara, Sri Ramakrishna, Christ. What all amount of work, we still remember their work and we are beneficiaries of their work even today. Today, 2000 years later, we still remember, we are still benefited by the teachings of Buddha for 2500 years. But you don't remember, you don't continue enjoying the benefits of a worldly successful person for thousands of years. So they were the archetypal successful CEOs, these great karma yogis, who made such enormous contribution to human civilization. But with all that, they did everything for the good of others. That is the yoga aspect. They did everything for the good of others. That's the yoga aspect. I can conclude by recollecting one example from a Swami. It's a Swami whom I knew very well. This Swamiji who built an important temple, built up a big center in India, Ramakrishna Mission Center. He was very active, very energetic. He was a ruthless taskmaster, but highly respected by everyone because of his total unselfishness, absolute dedication. He was highly respected. He was a big scholar, but did not write anything, because all the time his energy he spent to build up an ashrama in his temple. Now, he retired when he was almost 83 years old. 85 years old or so. After retirement, when he was 85 years, he completely withdrew himself from those duties because another person, another Swamiji became the head of the center. But this old Swami continued practicing meditation, japa and so on after retirement. When he was healthy, when he was building up this ashrama, he was always active. So people used to wonder why this Swami is so driven, so efficient, and he's not sitting somewhere doing pranayama or meditation long hours. He didn't do that. Apparently, he did it, but he, in his own private way, he did. He was a great spiritual practitioner. But people mostly saw him when he was supervising the construction of ashrama and temples and so on. But after retirement, he spent the remaining 7 years of his life. He passed away when he was 91 years old. No, 93 years old perhaps. He spent the rest of his remaining years, almost 7-8 years or so, in meditation, in japa and so on. How could he do that? He was practicing karma yoga till he was 85. And when he was 85, he retired. And then karma stopped. He left karma behind, but yoga continued. And he passed away in a very wonderful way. He was healthy, he was attending Arati, Vesper services till the previous evening, and he passed away in such a wonderful, sublime manner. Now you can find people, they were practicing karma yoga. After karma, yoga left. But if you do not practice karma yoga, and if you retire from your active service, then you become bitter, you become critical, you cannot confront the problem of loneliness. So retirement becomes a great torment, a great torture for those who do not practice karma yoga. That is one important warning for everyone in modern times. If you are just adherents of karma alone, action alone, then we are reducing ourselves into psychological condition where we cannot live without action. If our life becomes over-dependent upon action, activity, then we will develop an incapacity to enjoy solitude. So karma yoga helps you to achieve the art, the art of graceful retirement. You can retire from activity, but you still remain in a state of sublime tranquility and peace. In fact, especially in modern times, old age becomes a big challenge in modern times. Solitude becomes loneliness. Solitude should become something enjoyable. Loneliness is something scary and terrifying. But solitude is a blissful experience. And in order to enjoy solitude, you should develop the companionship with a higher ideal. And that companion will never leave us. God is that eternal companion. So, those who practice karma yoga can retire from karma and retain yoga, as you find in the example of the Swamis. So in modern times, karma yoga has got a special relevance, especially in the complex situation that we are facing in this modern industrial age. So we'll continue discussion in the next session. Thank you. Namaskar.
Okay, Maharaj, we can close.
Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.